again?
Mic check 21, test 1, 2.
Okay, that's good. So we got 21 and 23 over there?
Yes. Mic check 25, test 1, 2.
Okay. Hey, Virgil, hold up. Over there, by Dr. Razor and Dr. Marshall, should be 21 should be on the podium.
Getting ready for mic check on number 5 here.
Hurry up, Virgil.
That's Joe.
Mic check 21, test 1, 2.
It's good. It's good. It's good.
But where are these first?
All right, everybody good? Good evening and welcome to the November 9th meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education. Prior to the meeting, the board conducted work sessions to hear a report from the board's finance working group and to discuss the draft 2016 legislative agenda and strategic plan called Vision 2020. There was no formal action taken at any of those work sessions. Please now join us for our traditional moment of silence. Thank you. Our special guest from the Brown School will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please come forward.
I'm sorry.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Board Member Chuck Hadaway will now read our vision statement.
All JCPS students graduate prepared to reach their full potential and contribute to our society throughout life.
Thank you, Chuck. Next, Terry Robinson will lead us in this evening's recognitions.
Dr. Hargan's Board Chair David Jones Jr. and members of the Jefferson County Board of Education. This evening we have the honor of recognizing Brown School students Trafina Sithu, Nora Miadrag, and Sean Dwyer for winning first place and second place honors respectively in the open source high physics competition. The students were required to create a 2-minute instructional video teaching the physics of sound. Trafina and Nora's video included a highly effective animated demonstration of sound waves using a slinky. Sean's video provided a very clear explanation and demonstration of the Doppler effect. Trafina also won first place honors in a consecutive physics competition where she was required to create a 2-minute video teaching thermal energy and is a national semifinalist in the Breakthrough Junior Challenge competition. Open Source High was launched in the fall of 2014 and is the only online high school where students are the teachers creating a peer-to-peer learning community. Board Vice Chair Porter, please come forward and extend your congratulations to the Brown students. Joining in the recognition is teacher Mary Todd and Principal Angela Parsons. I would also like the parents of these outstanding students to please stand to be recognized. Thank you. Next, we have the privilege of recognizing Jean Ann Meredith, teacher at Moore Traditional School, for being named Kentucky's Project Lead the Way Biomedical Teacher of the Year. She was honored for her outstanding commitment to educating students participating in the biomedical program and for preparing them to be college and career ready. PLTW is a leading provider of kindergarten through grade 12 science, technology, engineering, and mathematics program. The program leads the nation in providing a world-class curriculum and a high-quality teacher professional development model, including a network of educators and corporate and community partners. Board member Dr. Lisa Wilner, please congratulate Jean Ann for her outstanding professional accomplishment. Joining in the recognition is her principal, Vicki Letty. We also have the honor of bestowing recognition upon Lindley Shoring, principal at Lure Elementary School, for being selected as a class of 2015 National Distinguished Principal by the National Association of Elementary School Principals. She was recognized for setting high standards for instruction, student achievement, character, and climate for the students, families, and staffs in their learning communities. Lindley is the only principal in Kentucky selected for this distinguished honor. Board member Dr. Lisa Wilner, please extend congratulations to Lindley. Joining in the recognition is Area 4 Assistant Superintendent Michelle Dillard. Finally, we are so very proud to recognize the Jefferson County Public School District communications staff for earning several outstanding achievement in School Information Services Awards from the Kentucky School Public Relations Association and the Kentucky School Boards Association. The OASIS Awards program recognizes excellence in the field of school public relations and dedication to keeping the community informed about what's happening in Kentucky public schools. The Jefferson County Board of Education and JCPS extends its deep appreciation to WAVE for its sponsoring of the communication staff attendance at the awards dinner. Now it is our honor to introduce Brad Hughes from the Kentucky School Boards Association, who is here tonight to give remarks and present an award to the communication staff. Mr. Hughes, please come forward.
Good evening. You heard the rigmarole before because this isn't the first rodeo for the communication staff that you have. So I'd like to just simply say a couple of things. What I'm going to present tonight is what we call the KSBA Sweepstakes Award. And we've been doing the OASIS program for about 19 years now. 9 years ago, we decided that while it's great to recognize an individual product, production, photograph, website, or something else like that, we wanted to recognize the whole depth and breadth of communications that a school district does. Now, we are considering possibly next year renaming the feature photography category the Jonathan Roberts Invitational, because I mean that's just the way that it seems to work out in play. But there are two things I'd like to let you know about tonight. When we made these presentations the other night down in Bardstown, and there were 17 districts that were recognized, there were two superintendents who drove all the way to Bardstown. One was an interim, and the other was Dr. Harvins. And so on behalf of my peers, not just who were there, but all across the state, I want to say how much I appreciate the fact that you obviously had nothing you could possibly be doing on a Thursday night. And after a full day of work to drive down there, it showed, and we appreciate it. I know your staff appreciate it as well. The other thing I'd like to point out is this. A few months ago, Dr. Hargens did a Twitter conversation with folks. And when we see interesting things taking place at KSBA, we try to spread the word around the state. And as we spread that around, another district who got a new superintendent decided they wanted to do it. It was so successful, they're going to do it again in the spring. And my point is just simply this. When Jefferson County Schools is innovative, creative, effective in how you communicate with the public, and as a taxpaying citizen community, you're communicating with me as well, it helps improve the understanding of public education around the state. And so we are all around the state indebted to all that you do. And so I'm very pleased now to join whoever in representing the Sweepstakes Award to you and your communication staff.
Right. Thank you.
Dr. Hargens, could you please join Chair Jones? The winning staff members are Sarah Haley, Brent Harrod, Dodie Rockledge Hart, Thomas Pack, Jonathan Roberts, and Supervisor Kim Katzman. Dr. Hargens and members of the Jefferson County Board of Education, this concludes our recognitions for this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson, and congratulations to all the recipients of the recognitions. Is there a motion to receive the recognitions? Okay, Dr. Wilner and Ms. Brady, all in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Is there, actually I believe there's one comment on the minutes of a previous meeting. Is that right, Mr. Hathaway? That's our next item.
Yes, just get some clarity on this. At their last minutes, under 6A, it says the last paragraph, Chair Jones stated that the legislative agenda will come back to the board for approval on November 23rd. And then on 7B, the last paragraph, last sentence, Chair Jones noted that the legislative agenda will come back to the board for approval on November 9th. So I don't know if you spoke twice or if...
I suspect that Ms. Smith is accurate and that I was confused, but it is in fact the 9th, because it's at this meeting, so I would be grateful with the board's forbearance if we could correct the minutes in that way. Is there a motion to approve them as corrected? All right, Ms. Porter, Mr. Hathaway, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. Those passed unanimously. We now should invite the parents and families and students who would like to leave, who've been here just for the recognitions, to please feel free to take your leave. We have an exciting meeting ahead of us, and you're, of course, very welcome to stay. But some people have homework to do, and anyway, thank you for being with us tonight, and congratulations. Okay. Our next item is the superintendent's report. So Dr. Hargens, we'll turn to you for that.
Thank you, Chair Jones, members of the board. It's my pleasure to call your attention to a few items of special interest in today's meeting. I'd like to extend a special welcome to Chief Business Officer Tom Hudson, who was with us at the work session, and also a welcome to Assistant Secretary to the Board, Angie Gilpin. Welcome to Jefferson County Public Schools. You'll note today in the agenda that our annual financial audit is complete. The financial statements will be presented this evening for acceptance from the board. The year ended with a planned and sustainable decrease to our fund balance, which was part of our budget process. Our future challenges, which we will monitor, will be to include the underfunded pensions in the classified employee retirement system and the certified retirement system. Ms. Harden, Mr. Munns, and external auditor Bill Carroll have been keeping us informed regarding the new accounting standard for at least 2 years, and this year we were required to book this pension liability. It is important to note actual numbers and to be, as we always are, transparent. The Commonwealth cannot deal with what we don't know in real numbers. I'd like to thank all the individuals who participated in the strategic planning process. The plan has improved each step of the way because of the widespread involvement. Last board meeting, I showed you a summary of the 14-15 results of the Kentucky Accountability System. As you might recall, we maintained our overall our level of proficiency and for our GAP students. Our college and career readiness rate improved 2.5 points to 63%, and our four-year graduation rate is still 79%, with more students graduating. This evening, Dr. Dossett and her team will show us how JCPS is doing relative to other large urban districts through the NAEP results. That is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It is often referred to as the nation's report card. But the most important question is, how is each individual student doing? The K-Prep report for individual students, each student was mailed on Friday, and families should be receiving the report for their student in the mail soon. We have put together a video to walk parents through interpreting that report. That video is on the JCPS homepage under What's Happening, and I'd like to show a portion of it.
Understanding your student's 2015 K-Prep report. We'll break the report down section by section. It is still very parent-friendly. At the top of the first page is a short explanation about the Common Core standards which are tested. You are also reminded that the results you will see are only one piece of information, and that in order to determine how well your student is doing, you should consider other areas including classwork, projects, and other assessments. The next area contains a chart showing your students' performance levels. Different grades are tested on different subjects. In this sample, you see 3 subject areas: reading, math, and on-demand writing. You see where your students scored and what the average score in that subject is at the student school, the district average, and the state average. The performance levels continue to be novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. In the next section, you get an explanation of your student's performance level in each subject area. What does it mean to be proficient in reading? This will give you a better idea of your student's level of understanding in each subject area. Moving to the back page, you will see your student's growth percentile. Last year's tests in reading and mathematics grouped your student and others with similar test scores. Using this year's test, your student is compared to his or her group, and a student growth percentile is created, which shows how your student kept pace or fell behind the group. Students must reach the 40th percentile to be considered achieving growth. The next section contains your students' lexile and quantile measures. These sound like fancy words, but quite simply, a student receives a lexile reader measure based on their score that describes their reading ability. By going to lexile.com, you can find books that are suitable to the student's lexile score. The quantile describes the student's mathematical achievement. By going to quantiles.com, you can learn more about the student's mathematical skills and understanding of concepts. Plus, you can also find activities parents can use with their children. Finally, you will see how your student compared to other students across the nation. Some of the questions on your students' test were the same questions other students across the nation had tackled on previous tests. The percentile ranking is in comparison to a national statistical norm group of students. In this instance, in reading, the student performed as well or better than 70% of the national group of students. In the last column, you will see what you and your student's teacher can do to improve and continue progress in that subject matter. And that's it. 2 pages that provide you with an idea of how your student is performing in the classroom. Again, please remember that this is just one piece of information. It is very important to be active in your students' learning. Watch for other indicators and talk with teachers to get an overall picture of your students' achievement.
So the most important questions are, number 1, did your student reach proficiency? Number 2, did your student experience growth academically? So that should be helpful to parents. And the nice thing about the video is you can play it over and over in case you need that to hear that another time. So, but again, how do you improve a district? Student by student, and we appreciate parents' involvement. And it is actually a board policy that that report is mailed to homes by board policy. Chair Jones, that concludes my report and my recommendation for approval of the consent agenda later in the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hargens. Our next item, we have 2 action items. The first is the proposal that we accept the comprehensive annual financial report for the year ended June 30th, 2015. And CFO Harden will come forward, I believe, and talk to us about what is in there. Each of the board members has already been briefed by CFO Harden and our external auditor on this report. So, all right, welcome. We have the whole team here. It's great.
Thank you. This evening we have with us Bill Carroll with Strothman and Company, who will present the financials to you, and Eddie Munns, the Director of Accounting. So we'll proceed and let Bill begin.
Thank you. Chairman Jones, members of the board, Madam Superintendent, we completed the audit on or about November 6th, which is our sign-off date. We've talked and met with most of the board or all the board at one time or another, going over it in detail. I'm going to talk about just some of the highlights and a couple of issues with it, and be ready for questions if you will. The district presents what's called a comprehensive annual financial report, which is a very lengthy, very involved document that discusses not only the financial issues of the school district, but also the introductory section of that deals with a lot of the qualitative aspects of the district. There's a financial section. There's also a statistical section in the back, which highlights a lot of trends and financial economic information, which is of value to readers, particularly people like bond counsels. It is a high-level document. I believe that the district is the only school district in the state of Kentucky that presents a comprehensive annual financial report. So that certainly speaks well for the financial side of the district. The first section, as I said, is qualitative. The financial section, which is the second section, is the part of the report that we have audited, that we have reported on in our independent auditor's report. Our independent auditor's report is what we refer to as an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion on those financial statements and other information included in the financial section. It's the highest level of opinion that we can give on a set of financial statements, and it certainly indicates to the readers that these financial statements are accurate, appropriate, present all the appropriate funds, all the appropriate disclosures that are required in a set of financial statements as set by the standard-setting bodies of the country. I'm not going to dwell on the individual numbers at length. I think Superintendent Hargens mentioned that the general fund had a deficit of about $800,000. Certainly deficits are not great, but I feel confident the district has sufficient financial resources, sufficient financial means, so the deficit will not cause any ripples or any impact on the financial condition of the district. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of information. Certainly we had a lot of conversation about the newest event to affect all governmental financial statements this year, which is Government Accounting Standards Board number 68, which is a pension liability statement. It was issued about 2 years ago. This is the mandatory implementation year. It affects primarily the district-wide set of financial statements, and it requires the recording of the unfunded pension liability of the county employee retirement system, which is one of the two main retirement systems that employees of the district belong to. That liability at the end of June 2014, which is the latest year information is available, was $264 million. Brand new, significant amount. Recording it in the district's financial statements resulted in a deficit of net position, if you will, or a fund equity of about $205 million. First time in my recollection the district has ever had a total deficit in unrestricted net assets or net position. I would, however, report that there are other categories of net position which were positive. Overall net position turned out to be a positive for the year. I'll take any questions you might have about the audit, about the financials, about GASB 68.
Chuck?
I want to thank all of you all for the briefing that I had. That was very helpful, and I'm sure that other board members can echo that. I did know that there was some edits you had to do since then, so I want to make sure that I understand a couple of them, if you don't mind. Just some numbers that were a little different than what I saw in my briefing, and I can wait on an answer, but if you can produce it now, that's fantastic too, but it doesn't matter to me.
We'll try.
On page 8, under the management's discussion and analysis, we talk about expenses and governmental activities increased by $141.1 million. I had a higher number produced before, and like I said, Cordelia, but I can get these answers later. I just want to draw attention to them. And then on page 10, under change, the first column of change, this is the summary of the total district-wide expenses for governmental activities. Again, there's somewhat of a significant change on the last item, which is interest, on the first column of change. And I don't know if I was in the first sweep of going through these numbers or not. And I think there is one more. Yes. On the introduction page of the management's discussion and analysis, under financial highlights, the paragraph on the district-wide financial statements, that's where it starts. The second sentence, the district's total net position increased by $5.0 million for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2015. In my briefing, it was $5.9 million. So I have a couple questions, Chair Jones, that are not necessarily from this report or about this report, but they trigger some other questions about capacity and also about student growth in relation to teacher growth. So I can put those in a board request later, or I can throw them out here now. So
Why don't we take them later? Let's
Okay.
stick to the agenda item, and this is really the audit, so it's purely it's backward looking, and I think it would be better to come with the forward looking requests.
okay, sounds
All right.
good.
Okay. Any other points on this one?
No.
Okay. Anybody else?
Just if I could quickly answer.
Yeah, please, Eddie.
One of the big changes, one of the reasons this report didn't go final until November 6th, which yes was last Friday,
Right.
We've had there's been very good guidance on this GASB Statement 68 in lots of respects, and the statement was written very well in lots of respects and was completely void of answers in lots of other respects. So one of the pieces was whether we have to allocate the GASB 68 to the enterprise funds because they are supposed to operate like a business. So they have to reflect their long-term liabilities and items like that. So there are additional items that we were kind of on the fence and trying to research when we had our meetings before about some deferred items and whether those also needed to be allocated to the enterprise funds. We allocated those, trying to be conservative, and it reflected some differences in expenses and revenues of small amounts.
Okay, and to your credit, you all had told me some of these things are changes, and I just wanted to make sure that those changes I saw were reflective of what you're adjusting for, what more education you had about that. So,
and we'll need to look into the interest one. So
okay, yeah, that was a significant change. So
we'll need to look.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay. I have a couple questions about the pension accounting. A $202 million deficit is a significant change from where we've been since I've been on this board, and Bill, as you say, since you've been auditing the account. I just want to make sure I understand the implications of that. Historically, or at least for the last 5 or 6 years, we've typically had a surplus of $50 to $75 million, right? Something in that order of magnitude. And we're required by Kentucky law or regulation to have a surplus of 2% of our general fund over our operating budget. And how much is that 2%?
36 million.
36 million.
Yes.
So we're required to have a $36 million surplus, and we've been running a little bit more conservatively than that at the 50 to 75 level. And now we've got a $202 million deficit. Are we required under Kentucky law to close that gap in some way, or if not, why not?
Let me address that. There's two sets of financial statements in here, accounted for differently. The district-wide statement is where we had to accrue the liability for the pension liability, and is that set of financial statements that shows the $205 million deficit. Mm-hmm. The fund financial statements, which were accounted for differently, do not reflect that pension liability. It's not required on those. Those statements have a fund balance on page 18, broken down into several categories. One of those categories is called committed. That's the $36 million, which is the 2% or better that we're required to maintain. I would also point out on the fund financial statements, which are the non-GASB 68, we have total positive fund balance of $119 million. So that is a more traditional financial statement for a government, and that's where you'll find the 2%.
So does that mean that the state government is not going to require us to fill the pension hole? I'm not hearing a quick yes.
Two different questions. As far as the 36 million, the 2%, we're covered, we're safe, everything is appropriate there, or I'd be required to report that.
Yeah.
So we're okay on the 2%.
And that would be a going concern kind of a...
It would be some sort of a disclosure,
like
yeah. As far as the pension liability, who's going to make that up is probably up for some discussion. Now, because we are the contributor to that plan, the state doesn't contribute to the county employee retirement. We do based on our payroll to the tune of about $30 to $35 million a year we put into that plan. That would imply that our future contributions to that plan will be necessary to cover that gap.
Higher contributions. So has the state ever contributed to that plan?
No, not to that plan. The
Do they
state-
set the contribution rate?
The actuarial does, sets the contribution rate, which varies anywhere from 17%, 15%, or 18 to 19%. Each year we get from the county retirement system what that employer contribution rate is. And we've always paid whatever that rate is.
So we'll come in a minute to the teacher's retirement fund. But if we're responsible for making the contribution, how did we get in this big hole?
The actuarial portion that has been attributed to Jefferson County Public Schools is based on the actuarial that has been developed at the county retirement system. And we're about 8.15% of the total obligation. So ours was $264 million. However, that being said, back in when they evaluated last year, it was $290 million, so it's actually improved. The liability must be booked because of GASB 68, the accounting standards. Is it possible that sometime we may be actually liable for that expenditure? Yes, but right now, the retirement system indicates that they have enough funding to fully fund the program for over 20 years. So what we're looking at, I think it would be premature for us to start setting aside or coming up with a plan. We need to see what the legislature might do or what the retirement system is going to do, because none of this unfunded liability is anything that we have done. It is based on investments that the retirement system has not made to provide the results they need in order to fund their program, and possibly even some fees, but it's not anything that Jefferson County Public Schools has contributed to.
So it's a lower than expected investment return,
Yes.
rather than a lower than should have done contribution.
Right. Yes.
Okay. And there's also a $3.7 billion unfunded obligation to the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System, but that is not brought onto our balance sheet for Jefferson County Public Schools. Can one of you explain the difference in that?
The county employee retirement system, we pay into that as a district based on a percentage times our covered employees. The Kentucky Teacher Retirement System has historically always been funded by the state of Kentucky, or supposed to have been funded by the state of Kentucky. We pay nothing as a district into that plan, into that retirement plan. Kentucky has, I don't think it's a secret, has underfunded that plan for years, and a combination of that plus actuarial calculations plus bad investment returns have contributed to that loss, to that unfunded liability there. But because this district is not required to pay into that plan, that liability does not go on our financial statements. We disclose it as information because that is a requirement of GASB 68, but it is not a liability on our financial statements.
Okay. That's like $3.95 billion or something like that, that last year was not on our statements and this year is. I mean, I think the takeaway for the board here is the state needs to make good its obligations under the teacher's contract, and we need to watch very carefully the county employee system, because that is actually our own, there's no state intermediary. If we begin paying into the county employee system, would we reduce only our liability, or are we just have 8% of the collective, so it'd be like voluntarily repairing the lobby in the apartment building or something, and everybody benefits, but we don't reduce our rent check or something?
That's basically true. It's a group plan, what's it called, a cost-sharing plan.
Right.
Has its own trust, and what we pay in may go to pay retirement for other districts' employees. It just You know, it's a pool of money and we put it into it, but there's no piece of that we can say is ours.
All right, so we can't get out of the hole by ourselves unless all the other districts get out of the hole with us or investment returns improve.
Right.
Okay. All right, that is not welcome news, but clarity is always welcome. So thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? Okay, I think I need a motion to accept the comprehensive annual financial report. Mr. Hadaway moves, Ms. Horn seconds, all in favor? Okay, it is unanimously accepted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item, 6B, is approval of the 2016 legislative agenda, and we have one speaker on this item, Ms. Gay Adelman. Ms. Adelman?
You pronounced it right this time.
I'm working on it. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Gay Adelman. I am a parent at the Academy at Shawnee, which is a priority school in the district. Every time I've spoken to the board, it's been to bring constructive and helpful feedback to light because attempts to have stakeholder input and concerns heard have been dismissed. Listening to the work sessions tonight and even interviews yesterday and today, it remains clear that that there is still a tendency to minimize feedback and concerns. You appear to have the perception that incidents that are brought to your attention are isolated. These are not new. These are not isolated. They are dynamic. They are systemic problems. Info only flows one way and stakeholders continue to not be heard. The existence of this dynamic and the number of people we encountered who felt the same way is why we started Dear JCPS. We started this group because the problems continue to escalate in the district, and we've heard from stakeholders who try to bring solutions, concerns, and ideas forward and are ignored or worse, treated as the enemy. It's frustrating when we see events that could have been mitigated if only this feedback had been considered, which brings me to the reason why I'm speaking tonight. I am concerned that the legislative agenda's goal to extend power to the superintendent for selection of principals in all schools, not just priority schools, further takes power away from stakeholders and takes them out of the decision-making process. The superintendent already leads the committee and has a vote. She says she needs this power in order to assign a principal who might not apply for the position. I ask, how has this additional power helped her with priority schools, which she already has power over? How does she not have the ability to do this collaboratively instead of in an authoritarian position? Why does she need final decision? I would like to encourage you to proceed with caution when taking any further stakeholder power away. As an example of a priority school where this power already exists, Dr. Hargens has chosen our last two principals, and I've watched more and more staff leave every year. Relationships matter. However, we have the highest staff turnover in the district. I can only count 8 people who were there from the time my son started there 3.5 years ago that are still in the building today. 8 people. We've had 16 or 17 teachers leave just this year alone. Stakeholder and SPDM feedback were solicited but not employed. We wanted consistency. That was our #1 concern. We had highly qualified internal candidates. Our principal was not named until the day before school started, and it was someone from the outside. I argue that a well-trained SPDM that is intimately familiar with schools' culture, population, needs, history, challenges, goals, and day-to-day happenings is more highly equipped to make better decisions at the local level than someone who oversees 171 schools that are all different and unique in their challenges. What worked elsewhere does not necessarily work here. We have bigger fish to fry before taking more power away from stakeholders. Let's work on improving the situations for the schools the superintendent already has power over before expanding that power district-wide. Leave the final decision at the school level where the accountability is held. Listen to teachers. They are the ones doing the work and know what we need. Give schools the ability to control their own destiny and not suffer consequences year after year from decisions they did not make. Keep the final decision at the school level because they are the ones directly responsible for serving the students, and they are the ones who ultimately pay the price. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hargens, would you like to introduce the legislative agenda?
Yes, what we have is, and you have a hard copy of it from the work session, is the legislative agenda for 2016. So I'm going to let Mr. Lowe explain the pieces of it.
So the first item on the legislative agenda is to provide increased funding for elementary and secondary education, and it goes through a number of subcomponents of that. The change that was made based on input from the work session is to include a request for SEEK add-ons for students eligible for a free and reduced price lunch. The second legislative item is to provide the JCBS superintendent greater authority to select principals, and this was language that was revised from the prior board work group, working to balance the wish to maintain a central role for school-based decision-making councils while also providing increased authority for the superintendent. The third item is about finding a sustainable solution for the KTRS and CERS unfunded liability. We just heard a discussion of that. That's going to be a key focus of the General Assembly in the 2016 regular session. And then finally, to develop and implement innovative assessment and accountability models. The goal here is to align with the discussion and conversation that is coming out of the Vision 2020 strategic plan to improve and reduce the amount of assessments that we do to capture both academic achievement and other indicators of student growth. On legislative policy positions, there were just a few changes that were made based on the input of the board in the work session. We removed the word public when discussing charter schools, but the guts, the key components of opposition to charter schools and the use of public funds for non-public schools remains. We clarified that the pension spiking issue it pertains specifically to the CERS pension system, and just so that people understand that. And then the balance remained the same: retain local control of the school calendar, making sure a school district can receive daily tax receipts instead of monthly. That's really making sure that our practice aligns with statute, and then permitting a Board of Education to meet in closed session to discuss the terms of a superintendent's contract. And that's what we have.
Okay, thank you. We had a work session on this. Any further discussion? If not, I'll take a motion. Anybody want to move to accept it, or raise their hand because they want to talk about it more? Okay, that's a motion. Okay, is there a second? Okay, Diane seconds. All in favor? Okay, opposed? Abstaining? Linda, did you vote in favor of it? Okay, unanimous. Thank you. I didn't see it. Good. Next item is an information item on the National Assessment of Education Progress Trial Urban District Assessment, and we have one speaker on this item, Chris Harmer. Chris, thank you. You're also familiar with the rules, so take it away.
Superintendent Hargens and board members, good evening. My name is Chris Harmer. I represent the Ditch the Gap Coalition. As you know, we're urging that the board make an explicit commitment in the upcoming Vision 2020 meaningful reduction of learning gaps between so-called gap groups and advantaged non-gap students. Current draft still does not address that commitment, and we oppose its approval as drafted. However, that's not why I'm speaking tonight. Our second demand has always been that there be teeth in that commitment in the form of learning gap reduction targets that the board and public can understand and respond to if necessary. In the course of research and interviews about possible options for those metrics, we learned about the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as NAEP. JCPS has participated in NAEP since 2009. As you know, it's given every 2 years to a few thousand representative 4th and 8th grade students identified through statistically valid randomized design. In any experimental design, though, there is a margin of error, a plus or minus in the sampling scores, just like in the political polls that we heard unendingly in the lead up to last week's election. The October 28th JCPS press release on NAEP results, the resultant media coverage, and the presentation you'll receive tonight herald JCPS closing in some areas of achievement gaps for both African Americans and Hispanic students as compared with white students. Unfortunately, while the actual scale score numbers may be correct in the PowerPoint, the conclusions we think are not. They seem once again more about management of perception. The snapshot summaries that NAEP itself provides tell a very different story. Those one-page summaries are attached in your packets and function as cliff notes for the presentation. NAEP takes a longer view to identify any statistically significant trends that can be relied on in your decision making. Look at NAEP's conclusions as you listen to the staff presentation. In the NAEP snapshots, you'll see the phrase "not significantly different" over and over, with one exception. So-called gains and gap reductions were not statistically significant over the period 2009 to 2015. And the data for Hispanic students did not yet meet data standards and was generally not even compared over that entire period. The gap between African Americans and whites' fourth grade math performance did show a statistically valid reduction. That's perhaps a small, though literally significant start. However, the inescapable takeaway for JCPS from NAEP this year, which, as you heard, is called the nation's report card, is that the other learning gaps between rich and poor and between black and white students are not significantly different now than they were in 2009. You know, there are some new ideas with great potential in Vision 2020 draft, and I don't want to belittle those. There were great words in Vision 2015 as well. What is needed is impact, not just the intention. As a matter of justice, of doing JCPS's part to break the cycle of poverty, we need explicit commitment now to narrow these gaps, followed by the initiatives, budgets, and assessments to make good on that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, you want to introduce the information?
I will just turn it over to Dr. Dawson.
Okay.
Good evening. Tonight we'll present the 2015 scores on the NAEP assessment. As mentioned earlier, that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. We assess every 2 years, and we'll be presenting the 2015 scores tonight. In JCPS, about 4,500 students are sampled in 4th and 8th grade that participate in the NAEP assessment. And we will spend the presentation tonight talking about a summary of where JCPS performs relative to other urban districts. This is an assessment that allows us to look at progress over time at the district level, the state level, and national level, and compare ourselves with other urban districts. There's 21 urban districts that participate in the Trial Urban District Assessment, which is the NAEP assessment for urban districts. So we'll show where we fall relative to other urban districts. We'll also talk about student group performance and where there were gains and where it was statistically significant. We'll denote that. But we also want to recognize that we are moving in the right direction with some of our groups, and while it might not reach statistically significant differences, we do want to recognize that sometimes that's meaningfully significant progress. So we want to recognize that when we can. And then show our cohort analysis. So JCPS started participating in NAEP in 2009, so this will be the first time that we can follow our 4th graders from 2009 to 2015 as 8th graders and see how well they've performed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tamara Lewis in the Data Management Division and Suzanne Wright to talk about the findings and implications.
Okay, thank you. Hello. Compared to NAEP tutor districts in reading, JCPS scored significantly higher than 14 districts in grade 4 and significantly higher than 11 districts in grade 8. And JCPS scored significantly higher than Lord City in both grades 4 and 8. And in math, JCPS scored significantly higher than 9 districts in grade 4 and significantly higher than 7 districts in grade 8. And JCPS scored in both grades 4 and 8 were significantly lower than the national public, but the same as Lord City. Okay, in reading and math, JCPS is outpacing the nation and state in average scale score gains from 2009 to 2015. A part of a quote from Michael Casserly, who is the Executive Director for the Council of Greater City Schools, quotes, "The district's results outpaced national trends in a number of areas at a time when average scores across the country were significantly down." These next charts are the tutor results at or above proficient and the 2015 K-Prep results. The blue bars are the NAEP trends, and the red bars are the 2015 K-Prep, which is our state accountability assessment. Now, our students were introduced to Common Core standards in 2012, and we're looking at the blue bars. There's a steady increase in NAEP proficiency. And what I also want to note is that NAEP conducted a mapping study in 2013 where they mapped state standards onto NAEP scales. And Kentucky was among top 10 states to meet NAEP's proficiency equivalency scores. So our assessment is on par with NAEP.
I don't understand the red bar here at all. Can you explain it?
Yeah, so the red bar is our K-Prep percent proficiency and distinguished, and the blue bars, which are the NAEP scores, and that's at or above proficiency. So on these charts, we're looking at proficiency. And that, like, if you look at grade 4 reading, all students, in 2015, the students' percent proficient distinguished was 48%, while for NAEP, it was 36%.
So when Tamara mentioned the mapping study, what that allows us to do is to look at how we're assessed on the state accountability model versus the NAEP test. And so in several other states, there's a large discrepancy between what's considered proficient on the state accountability assessment and what's considered proficient on NAEP. And what their mapping study showed was that while you do see about a 12-point difference, 10 to 12-point difference between what's proficient on NAEP and what's proficient on K-Prep, that difference is relatively small versus other states in the nation.
So, but we can't tell that from this chart. I mean, what I see when I look at the top left one is there's a 33% difference between the NAEP definition and the K-Prep definition of proficient, 36% to 48%. Is that?
A 12-point difference.
12-point, but 33%. So is Kentucky's test easier? I mean, what are we supposed to understand from this?
Well, according to this, what this shows is that proficiency, we have more students scoring proficient on the state assessment than on the national assessment through NAEP. So some might conclude that it's easier to be proficient on the state model than on the NAEP assessment, but I think that also speaks to the content that's covered with the Kentucky core content that's instructed throughout the year.
Okay, well, let's kind of put that question in the garage, because one of the issues that I think this board has to deal with is what do we make of Kentucky assessments? And here's an example of, according to Kentucky, we're a whole lot better than according to the nation's report card. What do we do with that information? But carry on, we'll come back to that.
All right, this slide illustrates the tutor average scale score results gains from 2013 to 2015 by subgroups. And now our white students made no gains for from 13 to 15, while our African American students made gains except in grade 8 math, where they had a 5-point decline. Our Hispanic group made gains in all areas except grade 4 reading, where we had a 4-point decline. And students eligible for free and reduced lunch made gains in all areas except for grade 8 math, where they had a 3-point decline. Now the green boxes are indicating gains, but the free and reduced lunch group is the only group to make a significant gain, which was in grade 4 math. Okay. And in reading, when comparing the gaps between student groups' average scores, JCPS white and African American and white and Hispanic gaps are lower than National Public and Lord City. And when compared to 2013, looking at the charts, JCPS is reducing gaps except for the white Hispanic gap group. In math, again, when comparing gaps between student groups' average scores, JCPS white and African American and white and Hispanic gaps are lower than Lord City and mixed when compared to the nation. And again, looking at the charts, the line charts, when compared to 2013, JCPS is reducing gaps except for the white African American gap group. And now we'll turn it over to Suzanne for the cohort analysis.
So as Dr. Dossett mentioned, we have an opportunity this go round to look at the scores in regards to the cohorts. So if you look at this particular slide, I want to bring your attention towards the bottom. In grade 4, these same students pretty much in grade 8, they had a 2% gain when it came to the at or above basic level in terms of the students testing in 2015, okay, compared to other large city as well as Kentucky who had the 6-point gain. So like I said, this kind of allowed us to kind of determine what we did in 4th grade to kind of help sustain some of this. So the next slide will give you an idea when we talk about the instructional implications. This is what is provided by NAEP. This is an item map, and what this does is it breaks down those skills. So from a curriculum perspective, we are able to see, so in 2011, the average scale score was 223, so the students were pretty at or above basic, as it says, 68% were making those inferences, and then 2015, the scale score was 261, and at 261, the 8th graders were at or above 70% in regards to evaluating the purpose. So it kind of gives us instructional implications in regards to the curriculum perspective of things. And so as we move on to math. So in grade 4, 2011, you can see we were at 78%. Grade 8, 2015, 58% of our kids in math were at or above basic. And as you can see from the chart, there is a 20-point decline. But if you look at large city as well as a trend within the state of Kentucky. And after carefully analyzing this particular information and talking to Great Garrett Council, Mr. Mike Cashley, and looking at our particular curriculum maps, one very significant epiphany was the content that was taken. So when you look at it from a curriculum perspective, the window for NAEP closed right around March. Geometry units were not taught in 8th grade until after the unit closed, or after the window for administering NAEP closed. So essentially, what does that mean? That means that the 8th grade students who took that NAEP test did not get a significant amount of the content, specifically geometry. And as a result, that kind of showed Kentucky as well as Jefferson County, because across the nation, they are seeing some of those declines in math. Now, the good thing that came out of it, they saw an opportunity to look at the alignment with Common Core Math specifically, as well as NAEP. And they pretty much agreed as well. As a result, the study, they were able to determine several other things. Like, for example, with Common Core Math, a lot of those skills were taught at a higher level than what NAEP's framework covers. There were also in looking closely at this, 2 high school geometry standards that are Common Core were also included in the NAEP framework. So as you can see, there was a lot of content that was not instructed when this test was administered, or the kids didn't get that opportunity. So what does that mean essentially in terms of what are we doing? We've met with the team, the ELA and the mathematics specialist, to look at this data very closely. As a result, it is providing us with information on how to move forward. So specifically speaking, we have embarked upon differentiation when it comes to professional development, and also we realize that math itself is difficult in regards to Common Core. So what we are also doing is very intense content specific professional development that truly engages the teachers to embark upon conceptual understanding, which is very difficult. So we have just taken that professional development piece and heightened it to the level where teachers are truly engaged in that conceptual piece. And then furthermore, using those released items and continually using the data to inform our curriculum work regarding professional development with teachers.
So to summarize, our key takeaways from the NAEP results from 2015 is that we held steady in both reading and math across 4th and 8th grade. We did see some progress with some of our student groups, such as our African American, Hispanic, and students on free and reduced lunch, with the students on free and reduced lunch in 4th grade math showing statistically significant gains. And then we performed better than the large city average in reading and on par with the large city average in math. So with that, we conclude our presentation and are available for questions.
Linda, Lisa, Chuck, in that order. You're on.
What percent of our students took NAEP?
So 4,500 students in grades 4 and 8. So about 1,100 students took 4th grade reading, 1,100 4th grade math, 1,100 8th grade reading, and I think 1,200 8th grade math.
So it's about a seventh. Sounds like it's about a seventh of what the total number that we have.
Right. So if you think we have about 7,000 students per grade, and this was about 1,000.
I noticed lots of groups left out. Do they not test those other groups in this? I mean, is that the way it is every time? They don't test our ESL, or they don't test our ECE, and they don't test the groups that we have?
They do test all of our groups, and all of our groups met that inclusion participation rate. We just showed you the students with the largest student numbers, or the population with the largest numbers, but we do test all of our students.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Lisa.
So 2 areas to ask about, and I'll start, I guess, with the more positive one. So we're outpacing the nation, we're outpacing the state. How do we account for that success? What are we doing right?
Well, I think specifically speaking in regards to the math at the elementary level, when you look at, and I know that we've seen in terms of where the kids begin Common Core and really delved into it. So we're talking about the 4th graders who took the test were 1st graders when we began Common Core. And I think that foundation is key, the fact that they were able to begin with Common Core at the 1st grade level, and so therefore every year the teachers were able to build upon that knowledge.
So the second part, not so positive. So the scores came out, and there was a press release, and I was sort of celebrating the closing of what appeared to be closing of the achievement gap. And then I'm sitting here looking at this National Center for Education statistics and seeing again and again achievement gap data not significantly different, not significantly different. And it's very discouraging. And so, Dean, I heard you say, and I wrote this down because I'd never heard this term before, and it's been a long time since I was in graduate school, so forgive me. But you said even though it's not statistically significant, it's still meaningfully significant, and I don't remember that from statistics class.
Right. Well, the point I was trying to make there is that in order to be statistically significant, you have to consider the sample size, and then you have to consider the error, the measurement error that occurs when you take an assessment. But a lot of times we also talk about whether something's meaningful, significant, or not. So you can have a large enough sample, a large enough number of students take a test, then even a 1-point difference is considered statistically significant. But would you consider that necessarily meaningfully significant? The same thing with, say, for example, a drug. So you take a drug to save your life, and you have to have an alpha level of 0.05, and instead your alpha level comes in at 0.10. So that wouldn't necessarily be considered statistically significant, but if it's in terms of taking that medicine and saving your life, then that might be considered meaningfully significant for those that didn't reach that statistical significance. And so really, the point I'm just trying to make with this is that while we aren't necessarily seeing statistically significant gains in closing the achievement gap, we still want to recognize that certain student groups did make progress and did show increases in their scores from at least from 2013 to 2015. Now, you also need to look at the long-term growth, and so when you look back at 2009, those differences between 2009 and 2015 are not as, we see these ebbs and flows, so that we might have seen increases in one group and then decreases the next year and then increases. So over a longer period of time, that difference has stayed relatively flat.
So the increases that we do see could be accounted for by sampling error. So we don't really know that we're doing.
With our free and reduced lunch, fourth grade, that is statistically significant.
So that's we still have that to celebrate,
yes,
right?
Yes. So but that is saying that there's no that difference is above what you would expect with any kind of error that you would see in measurement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chuck.
Our benchmark districts, which ones participate in this?
So,
the 10 that we identified before.
In terms of our benchmark districts, let me try to go back to this. So Austin is one of our benchmark districts, and in reading, fourth grade, we scored on average with Austin, same with 8th grade in reading, but in math, Austin outperformed us in both 4th and 8th grade.
Now, are they the only benchmark districts that participate in this that you know of? Are you representing, or did you
those are the
pick those markets?
No, these are the 21 districts that participate in TUDA as part of the national assessment. So, and Austin is one that is one of our benchmark districts.
I guess I have a foundational question here, and that is, it seems to me, at the risk of sounding cynical, and I don't mean to be cynical of how they collect their data or anything like that, because I don't know enough to do that, but it seems like you can find some kind of vehicle to tell a story that you want to tell. And what I'm wondering, we do this as a volunteer, right, every 2 years?
Right.
A couple things that concern me about it. Well, I want to know, why do we continue? I want to know the value beyond this report. Obviously, it's sprung a question that's important that Chair Jones asked. I mean, it obviously said, well, what's this say about our Kentucky assessment? But with this board and the working group that had talked about taking a burden off of the assessment cycle that we put our students in, what is the value of this, continuing this? Now, you said you followed it from 4th to 8th grade, or you followed our 4th graders now, but I paused to ask those questions because, Suzanne, you had even talked about you had to broaden our understanding of why the math scores came out the way they did and when the geometry was taught. So I guess my big foundational question is, do we continue with this NAEP? What are the key takeaways for us to continue in this when the board is talking about less assessment as well?
Well, this assessment does let us, again, compare ourselves with other large urban districts and the state and the nation as a whole. And that's something that the state accountability model and the state assessment doesn't allow us to do. So we can't compare ourselves with other large urban districts just based on the state assessment.
But do we know why our other benchmark districts are not participating in it?
Part of that has to do with the districts that are considered benchmark districts. So the districts that were identified in the state audit report, Austin is one of those. But and Baltimore City is also, one that we identified as part of the 10. The state audit report identified Baltimore County, but in terms of comparison, student demographics and size-wise, we're closer to Baltimore City in terms of comparison, and we're outperforming them in math in 4th and 8th grade. So there are a couple of districts, benchmark districts, that we can compare ourselves to. In terms of narrowing the amount of assessments that our students receive, this is again administered to 4,500 students, so it's not our total student population. It takes about 90 minutes, and students receive either reading or they receive math, but they aren't assessed in both reading and math. It's about a 90-minute assessment, and right now the way it works is that people from the NAEP office come in and administer the assessments to our students.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Chris?
Also, to talk to Member Hadaway's point, from a foundational standpoint, when we take a look at these tests and what we're volunteering for versus things that are required for us, and I have this general concern for our state assessments as well, is that by the time we get these results back, we have to wait like another year before we're really in a position to really address it, because we're already almost halfway through this year. And we have the same issue of our state assessment. I just wish there was some way that if we were going to volunteer for a test, that we have some type of way of getting a more immediate result. So we have a way of being able to, act upon this sooner. And it just seems to me that if we're volunteering for a test that gives us results back in in my view, a timely fashion, then I wonder really how much we're gaining from this. Now, I understand we're getting comparisons to other large urban districts, but like Member Hadaway pointed out, and you pointed out, there's only really one benchmark district in this. I'd really like the question as to, is this something that we really need to do? Is this something that's really required? Or, should we really have to do this? Because even though it's 90 minutes, that's still 90 minutes that, my 2nd and 4th grader are going to get, teaching time from their teacher rather than having to deal with another assessment. So just food for thought on that, and just to add on to Member Hadaway's foundational question, because I just don't see how useful this data is to get it, almost a full half a year later.
Diane?
Just a couple of questions. If I were tested in the 4th grade, would I get tested in the 8th grade, or is it a random draw for 8th grade?
It's a random draw, so it's
So as we continue to hear as a board about too much testing, would you or the superintendent, at what point will we evaluate what is too much and the value added for this particular test? I know we have volunteered to participate and we've done it over a number of years, but it's kind of hard for me to embrace the relevance of it when we are not testing the same students, so I can't tell if I've made significant gains from the 4th grade to the 8th grade. I see scores. We're not testing all of the 4th graders. We're not testing all of the 8th graders. So I think, as Board Member Hadaway would say, I'm curious to know the benefit as we continue to hear as a board that perhaps we're testing our students too much. This is not a yes or no question, but just want to be responsive to the fact that we are hearing and that we are listening, and it needs to matter. What people want to know is, did we improve, did we not improve, or did we stay the same? And the fact that we have no way of knowing who will be tested, it's a voluntary draw of the testing, it's kind of hard for me to understand how we determine growth from 4th to 8th when we're perhaps many times looking at a different set of students. So I appreciate the report. I don't want to be negative. I thank you for bringing all this information to us, the numbers, and what you've done with the information as far as working with staff. But I think at some point the board will have to have a conversation, a serious conversation, about the number of instruments that we are using to test our students and the value added for that particular test. So I don't have a yes or no question. Thank you for your report. We have to have a conversation. That's all I want to say.
So I'm going to say a couple words in praise of the NAEP. First of all, seeing ourselves regularly over time compared to districts that are of a like size and student composition is tremendously valuable. Comparing ourselves to Kentucky is, from my perspective, generally not relevant. You know, we are a big city. There is no other one in our state. And although we get a lot of good data from the Kentucky tests about our individual students, if I understand it right, the comparisons are, first of all, not often relevant. We are rarely competing against different smaller school districts in Kentucky to recruit people to our town or to hold them here. And it's very important to see ourselves in that context. There may be better ways to do it, there may be other ways, but I value that. Second, if I understand it right, this test is administered regularly, and the rankings are actually understandable and reliable, in dramatic contrast to the way Kentucky has played with percentile rankings and created a very, very unhappy situation, I think, for all of us who are trying to figure out how we're doing. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, and I also think statistical sampling of students, rather than testing every single one, is one of the possible ways that we might go forward in reducing the total amount of time that's spent in testing. And I don't know the answer to whether that's a good way or not. There's a lot of, I think there's risk in whether the sample gets gamed, but I think that's an important area that we don't want to lose sight of. Having 4,000 students take a test for 90 minutes instead of 101,000 take it for 4 days or whatever. That's a lot of time saved that gives us a view on how the system is working. So all of those are, I echo all of my colleagues, though, desire for a good conversation and good thought about, we all say we want to prune, and now here I am saying I want to protect this test, all right? So that's what, it's going to be much easier for me to prune somebody else's favorite than my own. One last thing, and then Steph, I'll pass it on to you. The thing that I don't get, though, really quite, I understand Mr. Harmer's critique. And actually, we've had a great community partner stand up and give us a 3-minute, what should we learn from all this data? We should learn that we're not really moving in the way we want to move in closing the gap. I will remember that. I don't know what I should remember from the more detailed presentation. Are we gaining on it or losing on it? And what should the takeaway be here? Because there are too many numbers for me to remember.
So I think two things to take away. One is that we stayed steady. So we didn't show big gains from 2013 to 2015, steady, just like we did with the state accountability model. The other piece to keep in mind is that we're performing higher than a lot of our urban districts in reading. Where we need to work on is math.
Okay, I'll remember that. Great. Steph, do you have something?
Just to follow up on David's, Donna, how do we move forward if the board is of a consensus that we like ourselves compared, outside of Kentucky, we like sampling, we like quicker results than waiting a year, almost a year. How do we move forward with this? Because I think we have a kind of a consensus, or that we like to get more information.
Well, and I think it connects exactly with the legislative agenda item of develop and implement innovative assessment and accountability models. How can you do assessment differently to get a sense of what our students know, but not test them to death to get that sense? And I would say that a large district, we should applaud our courage to see how we are doing relative to large urban districts. It would be easier to put your head in the sand and not know how you're doing nationally. It is the nation's report card. So even though we're not satisfied with the result, I think we have to applaud the district for being willing to say to the public, this is how we're doing and this is how we're going to get better. But I think Chair Jones's point is exactly right. 2 years ago, when we took to the legislature, let's test every other year, or let's test, we could in a large district test a random sample of students and get a sense of what third graders can do or not do. So that's exactly right. So I think we can learn lessons from NAEP, but I also want to be the district that is courageous enough to know how our students compare with other students nationally, because that really is who our students are competing with, both nationally and internationally, just not with students in Kentucky. So it's important to know that.
But that's the, like, we talk about the legislative agenda being the state. You know, we're going to be active to try to work on that on a state level, but how can we, as a board and with our management, work together as a district to kind of what both David and Diane are saying, that we like to look at what we're doing as a district. How can we move forward? What's the next step?
Well, and I think that's part of the strategic plan. That is part of the strategic plan, is we have an accountability system in Kentucky that we're locked into. Without legislative action, we must do it the way that it is prescribed and mandated. So without legislative action, we are locked into that. The formative assessment and the benchmark assessments that Dr. Branham and Suzanne Wright work on are the things that we can look at. Can we do that differently to not have as much testing? We've heard the argument, though, you do need to know how you're doing along the way. You don't want to wait till the end of the year and realize students don't know what they're expected to know. There's no way to remediate if you wait until the end. In fact, that is called autopsy data for the reason it's too late. It's the final score of the game to do anything about it. So how do we, in a very intentional way, get a pulse of how our students are doing so that the final score of the game is better? And how do you do that in a reasonable way? That's the question, and that's the challenge that we need to talk about.
Right, I agree. And so, but I don't know, what is our action item? Do you know what I mean? Is there, like, I don't know, is there an action item that as a district we need to do something, work through the strategic plan, and this is focused in Dr. Branham's court in a sense right now?
Well, it's a specific strategy that we went over in the work session, is to look at the assessments that we do. And of course, our legislative agenda is aligned to see if we can get some movement there. So it's exactly that. Look at the whole picture and how much time has been spent.
But I think if I can just jump ahead to we're going to talk about the planning calendar and what's coming up later in the meeting, but my understanding of how, Steph, the good discussion turns into an action item is the metrics and the implementation plan that comes under these headings. I mean, the heading is, let's have more authentic assessment and reduce the amount of time testing. The how-to part, which we're supposed to get on Friday in first draft and have to iterate through, is going to have to say by when, by what are the next steps, and what we're going to need is the brain power, you know, here and with all your colleagues to tell us what can be done away with without reducing the ability of teachers to, you know, to bring their students along in the way they need to. That's what we got to do. I mean, we won't figure that out here. All we can do is create space for you guys to go in there and prune stuff away, but keep the stuff that is valuable. But that's, you know, Friday we get a first iteration. You know, 2 weeks from today we're asked to approve the strategy, and then in December we're going to look at a gaveling down on the plan. Lisa? And then Linda.
I just wanted to make 2 points, actually. One is the legislative agenda, and obviously looking for that flexibility, but also I think we have an opportunity to ask for some waivers, right? Short of a change in the law that JCPS can specifically request some waiver to get us out from under some of the burden of the
Correct.
mandated testing. So that was something we talked a lot about in our work group. So I wanted to just make sure that doesn't get too far off the table. And the other thing is that different tests serve really different purposes. And so we don't look to the NAEP data, for example, to tell us how an individual student is doing. That's what happens in the classroom every day with teachers doing local assessments. How is my student doing in this class on this material? But we need lots of different kinds of information. So I'll join with my colleague, Mr. Jones, in defending the NAEP, even as I'm advocating to prune away some of the other kinds of perhaps unnecessary testing.
Okay, Linda?
Well, not to muddy the water any, but those urban districts that we compare to, we're an urban-suburban kind of district. Are there others on that list that are urban-suburban, so that there's a difference between just a purely urban district and an urban-suburban district. So are there others like us on that list?
Right. So Baltimore City is one that's an urban district, and then you have Baltimore County, which is the suburban. But Hillsborough County is urban and suburban. It's Tampa. So Duval County as well. So there are some districts on this list that are both county, city, merged types
It's
of
kind
districts.
of it's a mix of that.
Right.
Chuck?
Just one question for clarity. And if I missed it, I'm sorry. The large city category, how is that defined?
That's the average of the
The average
21.
of all those. Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there a motion to accept this report? Steph moves, Diane seconds, all in favor? Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion. We're going to move now to the consent agenda, which Dr. Hargens has previously recommended. Would board members like to pull any agenda items down for further discussion? Chris?
Item P.
P as in Paul.
That's correct.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, you want to comment on P?
Sure. This particular agenda item is for approval to name the main entrance drive at Seneca High School, John Locke Lane. John Locke was a principal at Seneca for several years, and although I'm not a graduate of JCPS, my wife is, and she is actually specifically a graduate of Seneca High School. So when I was reviewing this particular agenda this past weekend, I had made mention, said, oh, hey, honey, guess what we're going to be doing? And we're going to look at voting to name the main entrance after John Locke. Her response was, oh, yeah, you're voting for that. So John Locke was her principal. She credits him for a lot of great things that happened at Seneca, and also personally with her academic achievement. I will tell you that almost 10 years after she graduated and she hadn't seen Mr. Locke, she was a substitute teacher that was walking into Seneca, and the moment she walked into Seneca, Mr. Locke was there and identified her by name immediately. My wife posted this particular issue or this particular viewpoint on Facebook, and many, many people shared or had similar instances of this. So, and I will tell you that my own experience at JCPS is formed partially by my wife's experience as being a substitute teacher and also her experience at JCPS. So in many ways, John Locke has influenced me as well. And this is just typical of some of the influence that our teachers and our principals every day exert that goes well beyond just the students that they teach. So I just want to speak in favor of this, and I know that he's held in very high regard and high esteem of the alumni of Seneca High School, and I just wanted to point that out and also encourage everyone's vote for this and support for it.
Okay. Shall we give you the opportunity to move the consent calendar?
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, Ms. Porter, all in favor? Thank you very much. Good. Appreciate the note of personal touch with Principal Locke. We're now moving on to board reports, requests, and the planning calendar. Are there board reports or requests? Actually, Chuck, we started with your, we tabled a couple of your requests. Do you want to put them forward before we forget them?
Yes. One, I want to reiterate my request on the absenteeism rate on teachers where that's been, and our supply of substitute teachers. And I want to, I apologize, I don't know who should get credit, maybe Dr. Rager, but
I'll take it.
I want to applaud the, thank you. I want to applaud the response to what we were dealing with substitute teachers having to do a certain number of days, or they would have to reapply. I understand that has changed, and it is, I've heard from a number of substitute teachers that have said that was a little bit easier to navigate, and it's going to help hopefully your substitute supply. Going back to the comprehensive annual financial report, really love this report, really glad for everybody that was involved with it, but it did spring a couple questions for me, and I'd like to put them as a request. There was, on one page, it talks about the change, the percentage change in number of teachers, and it's very minute. It's a 0.3%. I wanted to know, I wasn't quick enough to do the math, but I wanted to see if our percentage change in teachers is it independent of our percentage change of students, and how many are we getting in our classrooms, or is it pretty much the same? That's one of the things that I wanted to ask. And the other question I had was about capacity, and this is a high-level question, and maybe just needs to spring some more discussion. I know that Board Member Horn has talked about this before, especially with one of her middle schools out there. And looking at the back part of that report, we have a good report of school building capacity, and there's a number of them that have passed capacity. My question is, how does that happen, and how does that affect student achievement in the classrooms? What's happening when we go past capacity? Are we having classrooms in, closets or makeshift rooms? I can suspect what the answer is, but I think these are two questions that I'd like a further discussion about. I mean, I know we've talked about it on capacity a number of times, but how does that happen, and do we have data where it affects achievement?
Okay, thank you. And I think with respect to the capacity, we ought to take that in the context of the flow chart that we saw earlier today about the budget timing and when the allocation formulas. That would be it would be great if we could work that input into the time when we're considering that, with plenty of time that we can actually do our learning and understanding before we have to vote. Who else would like to report or request? Lisa, then Linda, then Chris. Sorry.
I'll start with requests and then go to report. So I have 3 requests that all sort of fall broadly under the heading of student behavior. The first has to do with something that I've just heard about, and I don't know how widespread it is, but I'm interested to learn more. So it's my understanding that at least some FMD or functionally mentally disabled classrooms have been reclassified as moderate severe disabilities, which is apparently a much broader category. Thank you. Which is apparently a much broader category, which means that there's perhaps less nuance in placements, in student placements, and that maybe students are being placed in classrooms that are not as tailored to their needs, or being placed, again, anytime we lose the nuance, I'm concerned about what that means for individual students and individual classrooms. So I'm curious to know if this change from FMD to moderate severe disabilities, if that's something that was mandated by the state, or if it was a board policy, or if it was an issue of convenience. So I'm very curious to learn more about that. Second request has to do with SRTs. The student response team And I've been trying to educate myself about the SRT approach and trying to read up on it and talk with folks in other districts, and nobody else seems to know about it. It seems to be a specifically JCPS kind of approach. So I'm curious about it. It seems like it's a reactive approach rather than a proactive approach. I'm curious to know when it was implemented, why it was implemented, is it working? And since it's more, from what I can tell, it seems to be more responsive rather than proactive. I'm curious to know how it compares with more proactive approaches. For example, specifically the Care for Kids program that was district-wide, but we don't have anymore. So I'm interested to know more about that. And then the third, we're hearing, I guess, anecdotally about mid-year teacher resignations, that there's sort of stories about one explanation for that. I'm guessing there's probably a more nuanced, richer explanation for why why teachers might resign mid-year. But I'm wondering if we know, if there are exit interviews that we're doing and what we can learn from those exit interviews, assuming they're happening. So that concludes my requests. Just quick report. I was really fortunate a week and a half ago to attend a national convening of school board members from across the country in Los Angeles. It was hosted by an organization called Local Progress, and they had convened municipal elected employees for the past several years, but this was the first convening of elected school board members. So it was really a fascinating, lots of resources, lots of good information. So some of the just good ideas that I learned more about were community schools, which I formerly thought was neighborhood schools, but it's really something quite different from that. There are folks associated with the organization who are willing to come to present and talk to us about that at no cost to the district. So I want to just offer that as a resource. There was a lot of very good information about empirically supported approaches to restorative practices. RP comes in many different flavors. Some have good empirical support, others don't. And so this was really a focus on empirically supported, not just for behavior, but also to promote academic achievement. So that was enlightening. And also really great information about culturally inclusive curriculum, including some really wonderful stories from California where students were coming out in droves to demonstrate and to have vigils to advocate for additional graduation requirements so that they could have culturally responsive curriculum as part of their graduation requirements. So that was very interesting. And then the last thing I'll say, this is a happy week for me because it includes two of my favorite things, schools and psychology. This is School Psychology Awareness Week. So wishing everyone a happy School Psychology Awareness Week, and hats off and kudos to the school psychologists out there doing great work in our schools every day.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
Okay, I have a couple, and Lisa and I hadn't talked, but we're similar here. One thing that I would like to request is, what are we doing about 107 vacancies that we have? And many of them are in our priority schools and some of our other schools that are teetering there. So 107, I heard that, and that's quite a number, and I think it has an impact on our substitutes because we're having to move substitutes over into these positions to fill or to seek people to fill vacancies. So I'm just curious about what are we doing about a number like that. Here we are coming up at mid-year, and is this unusual? Seems like a pretty high number for me. Is this unusual? And then the other thing, we've had, I had a focus, our attention focused on behavior in some schools. And so, my question is, when we see schools with high numbers of ESL kids and high numbers of kids who are needing mental health and have those needing professionals to help deal with them, what are we doing? What is our response there when we recognize and understand we have schools with those needs? Because not all of them have them, but many in my district in particular have these challenges. High numbers, growing numbers of ESL students, growing numbers of kids with emotional challenges. And when we see that, what are we doing to help address those needs in those buildings? My reports finished up making the connection at Knight Middle School and at Farnsley, and I always loved that program. And I was at Fairdale the other day. AT&T brought their simulator for It Can Wait, the program anti-texting and driving campaign that they introduce in schools, and the kids get a chance to sit at the simulator and drive and experience what it's like to text and drive, as if many of them don't know, and many of them don't know and hope that they never know. But we heard some very sobering stories during that time, during that presentation. But then November 19th, it's the Great American Smokeout. I have a box of things that I was supposed to bring and hand out to you all tonight. I left in my car. So I will bring them to you on Wednesday for, you can give them to people that you know who would like to at least not smoke for one day, November 19th. That was from the South Jefferson Neighborhood Place meeting this morning. Dodie Huff.
Okay, Chris?
Thank you. I wanted to also share, I guess, or reiterate some of the items that Member Wilner, Dr. Wilner mentioned as well. And in particular, with the recent media story about teacher retention, it was reported that JCPS isn't collecting data as to why teachers leave the district. And I'm not sure if this needs to be dealt with something as a request or if this is a policy change or whatnot. But I would like to have the, if this is in fact the case, I would like for it to be our policy, or at least our practice, of capturing that data. I think it's important that we know why teachers are leaving our district, whether they're retiring or if they're retiring under duress or some other reason. I know in the private sector, in my own job, my company does exit interviews to get an idea of the sense of how they're doing and how they're progressing and how they can retain workers. And obviously, it takes quite a bit of money and training to be able to get folks used to your system. So we want to be able to keep them as long as we can. And I think this is beneficial if we collect that data. From a report perspective, I also just want to say personally thank you to the YMCA and JCPS for their Child Enrichment Program, or CEP for short. This is basically the before and after school program that many parents, including myself, take advantage of almost every day, at least for me. So we had the opportunity last week to celebrate, was it 30 years of that program? And I just want to extend my thanks to everyone at the YMCA as well as JCPS for, as a parent, for having that program around, because I know that that has been a lifesaver for the dual income parent household that I'm a part of. So thank you.
Steph?
I just wanted to report out on some things that I have done recently. I have found, being on the board, not quite a year, but I find the culture here, the people I talk to be very creative, reflective, and full of collaboration. I see us moving away from just complaining about the problems to looking at things as opportunities for solutions. And in that light, I went and attended the Pritchard Committee that had a bunch of educators and parents from JCPS, just parents involved. It was exciting. There were teachers there that are involved in the Hope Street project. And really, I guess I'd say the lines of communication, like you heard that through the state, we're getting an award for tweeting. People we're communicating, I guess I'll say, laterally, and between schools more, and between departments and schools. So I see things happening that can lead to great opportunities for problem solving, and that's kind of my approach to things, is to look, taking this year and looking for opportunities to actually do and to stop talking and try to see what we can do as a district. Things that we have done that we celebrated today were like the Bellwood Euspiritus collaboration that was on a consent agenda. That's an exciting thing going on with horticulture and science and across our community with very young elementary school children. We also had a event I attended with some community people, was sponsored by Angela Leet, who's a Metro Council representative for part of my district, and it was a synergy with Spalding University, which is another one of our community partners here at JCPS, and they're looking to do professional development, with us and partner, with Tori Murden, the president there. They were very excited about the opportunities. I did have just a few requests. I know I had requested data last time just on the professional or the advanced program to figure out if there were children that are falling through the cracks, basically. I'd like to get the data to see the children that are designated as advanced program but not proficient or distinguished. Possibly you could even start with the ones who are showing up as novice, and to see how many there are and whether their interventions are being identified. I'd be very interested in seeing that data. And then the museum school financing. This time last year I was attending some board meetings, I think it was last year, where there were people presenting and we had chosen, JCPS had chosen 2, but there were 2 others on the list. And it was so intriguing, that museum financing, museum school. And so I just wanted to see, maybe could come back in some other form, with the foundation, coming today to our works group. Maybe there's some ideas that their collaboration could come back together on that issue. And then also wanted to renew my request for, I haven't had lately the contracts on the agenda that we're asking to renew, but wondered if there had been measurements of outcomes that we're starting to gather, so when the contracts are presented for renewal, we can see kind of data related to the renewal. I think there is some effort going on there, and that's what I just wanted to hear more about that. It seemed like we approved some org chart movement that could have really exciting implications for measuring, contract renewals for programs.
Okay. Diane, do you have anything? Chuck? Do you have something? Okay, all right. I have one quick report. Happy event last week. I think it was Wednesday night. 5 of the 7 school board members managed to get together for a potluck supper with spouses and had a good time. Dr. Hargens and Jeremy were also in attendance. We were sorry that Linda and Lisa had other higher callings, a grandchild's birthday, and you said something about psychology week. I guess that was kind of part of the plan, wasn't it? Yeah, busy time, but anyway, it was good to get together. No business was discussed, but we had a very nice time getting to know each other a little bit better. The other point, I want to call everybody's attention to the Wednesday night meeting with Dr. Owsbury, and one of the things that he's going to talk to us about was how to better manage this part of the meeting, because I'm just struck up there. A number of individual requests have all come together and created about a 6-month work plan for the entire senior management here. The board only acts when, the only way the board can actually require anything is by unanimous vote. And by the same token, it's absurd to be that formal to get information that we all need to be able to communicate about what's going on and to be well informed. We don't need to, so there's some gray area in between there. But I think that's an area where, everybody please read the report and, and come in. I think that we may be able to learn how other districts get after some of this need for data, but also need to let people do their jobs and not constantly distract them with new analysis that's not really part of the board's agenda. That's all I've got. We've got a planning calendar. Is there a motion to accept the planning calendar?
I have something. I'd like to have
Is that a
something.
motion?
No, I'd like to add something to the planning calendar. We didn't.
Okay,
We
please.
didn't do that. Salary study. We never have. I don't know when that's going to end or when it's going
Good
to make
question.
an appearance. But the salary.
That's a good
study.
question. Yeah.
And
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else on the planning calendar? Okay. Is there a motion to accept it? Chris moves it. Is there a second? Diane seconds. All in favor? Unanimously approved. Thank you very much. We have now received the planning calendar. We have two persons requesting to address the board on non-agenda items. The first is Philip Setters. Philip Setters, you here? You have 3 minutes to address the board. After 2.5, 1 bell will sound, and after 3, 2 bells will sound. Yep.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Philip Setters, and I am a disaffected parent. I'd like to read to you from a public record. November 9th, 2015. Dear Attorney General, subject, open records complaint. Pursuant to KRS 61.880 subparagraph 1 and KRS 61.880 subsection 4, I am complaining against the Board of Education of Jefferson County, Kentucky, hereafter Board of Education, for failing to comply with the statutory requirements and subverting the intent of the Open Records Act as follows. On October 26, 2015, I attended a regular meeting of the Board of Education at the Van Hoos Education Center, which is located at 3332 Newburgh Road, Louisville, Kentucky. At that meeting, I provided a copy of the enclosed application to inspect open records to the purported official custodian, as defined by KRS 61.870 subsection 5, the superintendent, and every elected member of the Board of Education. On November 4th, 2015, I visited the office of the official custodian at the Van Hoos Education Center in an attempt to inspect the identified records as well as those pertaining to previous requests. None of the requested records were made available for inspection. I was admonished to make an appointment or call ahead in the future. Additionally, I was informed that me asking an employee of a public agency if anything else was ready or available for me could not be tolerated. Furthermore, KRS 61.872 subsection 5 or KRS 61.880 subsection 1 requires the public agency to justify in writing why records are not being produced within 3 days of a request or otherwise being withheld from disclosure. While I have received a letter from the superintendent, also enclosed, acknowledging receipt of the application by the official custodian and communicating a failure to properly respond to a previous open records request, I have received no such written information concerning the records identified in the 2nd through 5th items of my application to inspect. I adamantly believe that the public agency is stonewalling in retaliation for my criticism, and that in order to stifle dissent and otherwise impede the further exercise of my constitutionally protected rights, the agency is refusing to abide by the Open Records Act. And by the way, I still haven't received those student fees from Fern Creek High School for 2014-2015 school years and 2015 and 2016 school years. So much for transparency and collaboration in this district. I really appreciate the assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Setters. The next speaker is Aaron Corbelow. Did I get it right? Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. I'm here tonight with a message from our dear JCPS members. The teacher-student relationship is imperative to the success of a school and the school district. The school year has been a very rough one for the teachers of JCPS, and we are only a third of way into this school year. We at Dear JCPS are hearing from teachers all across the district in elementary, middle, and high schools, speaking of student behavior, of the lack of timely and relative discipline, of the feeling of lack of administrative support, and the overfocus on data to the detriment of student learning. This signifies that it is not just one school, but a district issue that needs to be addressed post-haste. I will share with you one quote from a teacher, and we are sending out emails to all of you all to a link to many of the stories and comments we have received recently, so be sure to check your email. One teacher wrote, saying, quote, they're desperately looking for a holy grail. By creating a mountain of data to mine for the magic bullet, they have distorted the educational process into constant testing and assessing. It has turned teaching into clerical work. Instead of asking if they can help with the child who is homeless and reads below grade level, the district is like, quote, Miss Smith, have you turned in your data? Helping kids takes a back seat because data comes first, end quote. So in light of the increase in behavior issues so many schools are having, I have to ask this. If the district does not show respect to its teachers through its actions, how can you expect the students to do the same? Sensible performance goals do help people understand what is important. However, an obsession with metrics and data and a worldview that says teachers and schools are just a sum of their numeric goals are the signs of a fear-based culture. Parents are afraid to speak out in fear that their child will be blacklisted and won't get into their top school. Teachers are afraid to speak publicly for fear of retaliation. And let's be honest, people don't become teachers for the paycheck. They become teachers because they have something special inside that makes them want to shape every child who sits in their classroom. Without quality teachers, our students will suffer. Our students need teachers to feel safe and valued. We need our teachers to be able to share their passions with our students for our own student successes. We need JCPS to change its culture. JCPS has to stop asking, how can we manipulate the data to make JCPS look good to the public? Instead, the question has to be, how can we as a district do the right thing for all of our students, regardless of how it's perceived? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corbelow. Now we have completed our speakers on non-agenda items. We want to recognize that our sign language interpreter has made it all the way through this long board meeting by herself. Usually there are 2 interpreters. Tonight there's only 1, so big round of applause. Yeah. Thank you very much. At this point, the board does need to go into executive session pursuant to appropriate statute. So we're going to, actually, I guess I need a motion that we go into executive session.
Bears and
All right.
Chargers.
Porter moves. Ms. Horn seconds. All in favor?
Yes,
Aye.
Bears and Chargers.
Thank you very much. And we'll be back after we adjourn.
Here's the explanation. There are, the advertised positions are included right now as well. When we say how many vacancies, we have started the year, how many